We're back for another week at ThinkTech. I'm Jay Fidel. I look forward to this show and all the shows on ThinkTech. And we start today with a Skype call with Marco Mangelsdorf from Provision Solar, an energy expert in Hilo, Hawaii-NEE. Welcome to the show yet again, Marco.
Well, it is one enchanted afternoon, Jay, that I get to speak with you again.
You know, we have a picture of you standing by the gossamer wings there, the solar impulse, if you will. And of course, it's an old picture. But query, is it still on the ground? I understood they burned up their battery so bad that it wasn't going to actually leave Hawaii for months yet. Is that true?
As far as I know, you're right, Jay. The last I heard, and I haven't heard any update. I can check with my ABB friends because they're one of the principal sponsors, but I thought it was essentially stuck there at the hangar over on West Oahu until sometime in the spring, till sometime spring of 2016.
You know, if the damage was that serious coming over, and I forget why the batteries were so stressed out that way, the guy who was flying it ought to be happy to be alive, because just as easily it could have gone into the drink.
Yeah, it kind of causes me to wonder, with all this hype and spin regarding batteries, and there is a tremendous amount of hype and spin regarding battery storage these days, and I've seen the hype and spin over the course of 37 years now, and I'm rather perhaps jaded and at least somewhat skeptical, but I wonder if it's a cautionary tale in terms of what happened with these high-polluting batteries for the solar plane that was doing its around the world gig until it got waylaid in Honolulu. Does it have any meaning for the battery technologies and hype and spin and smoke and mirrors that are being proliferated these days by battery manufacturers for off the grid, on the grid applications?
I'm sure it does. I'm sure there's a lesson here. I mean, if I were those guys, the French fellow and the Swiss guy that are running a solar impulse, I would be making very careful study of exactly what happened on the way east to Hawaii, and I would be sharing that information with the battery manufacturers. Not only the battery manufacturers that made the batteries in the solar impulse, but all battery manufacturers. There's got to be lessons we can learn from what happened, whatever happened.
Yes, indeed.
Well, let's go on to our agenda, Marco. I'm calling this the state of clean today. Instead of the state of clean energy, we'll just call it the state of clean. It sounds so clean to me. And we have a few things on the agenda, but first, as always, we need to talk about the merger, because the merger, casts a shadow over everything. Been going on almost a year now. I think they rolled it out in early December. It'll have its rollout anniversary like next week. And I guess we're still in the thick of it. Hawaii, the state of process. We got tons of process, and we've had a lot of process. We've had thousands of questions posed to each other, lots of rhetoric, tons of rhetoric. And now we're going to see if the rubber meets the road at the PUC hearing. So give us a thumbnail of where we are and what's going to happen, next week, and what it all means to the process.
Well, we are, like you said, we're a week away from the beginning of the really big shoe, as Ed Sullivan used to say on his Sunday evening variety show years ago. Really big shoe, really big shoe.
I remember. I'm not that young, you know.
So do I, Jay. So do I. The really big shoe being the evidentiary hearings, which are scheduled to start next Monday, the 30th, at Neil Blaisdell. And it's going to be a big shoe, because there are going to be as many as 25 interveners there. The applicants being Nextera and Hawaiian Electric Industries, the three commissioners, Randy Awase, Lorraine Akiva, Mike Champley, and their staff. The press will be there. The cameras will be there from Olelo. And I imagine it's the first day or so is going to get quite a bit of airtime. The schedule is that the CEO of Hawaiian Electric Company, our friend Alan Oshima, will be leading off the really big shoe as the first witness, and the CA, if I'm not mistaken, the order will be the commissioners will be able to pose whatever questions that they have to the witness. Then the CA, the consumer advocate, Jeff Ono and his staff, and then the interveners.
25,
So,
at least. Yeah.
Yes.
How long
yes,
does it take for 25 angels to dance on the head of a pin?
Well, one of the caveats being that NextEra may or may not be able to find an additional intervener to settle with, so to speak, that Leslie did with the IBW a number of weeks ago in order to have them essentially drop off the docket and essentially endorse the deal and drop off the docket. But I mean, if I understand correctly, they're running out of days to do that from now until Friday. So I'd be surprised if they're able to pick off more than another one or two, and perhaps not even another one or two.
Yeah, but why would the IBEW just drop off the docket? Why don't they come down to these proceedings and articulate why they are endorsing the deal? I mean, that seems like a waste if they endorse it but don't say why. Seems like to me, if I were Hawaiian Electric, I would want them there, and I would want them to make an opening and closing statement for the proposition that this is a good deal and serves the public interest, don't you think?
Well, that is a question that is beyond my pay grade, my friend.
Okay. Well, let me go to another question that may or may not be within your pay grade. So in this morning's PBN, there was an article which I didn't get into detail with, but struck me as really unusual, and that is that the AFL-CIO now, another union organization, has endorsed the NextEra deal. Well, that is something. I know they're not interveners, but it certainly shows you that labor is behind this deal. Labor likes this deal. We have to examine why. But we also have to examine why an endorsement would come from somebody who's not an intervener, because, I mean, there might be others out there who are not interveners and yet who would make public statements of endorsement, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to observe that the applicants, especially NextEra, they've been doing a full court press to get folks to come down on their side, and they've been able to bag a number of business leaders in the state that they're using in their marketing and their advertising. They've been able to bag several of the interveners, and they've apparently been able to bag the AFL-CIO, although I'm looking at PBN right now, and I don't see any listing of that, but it's essentially trying to bring to their side individuals and groups that have bought onto the proposal that NextEra can do more better for the state of Hawaii in terms of power generation, transmission, distribution, lower costs, and so forth than the current occupant, so to speak.
So what does it mean that organizations of some repute, like these labor unions, especially IBEW because they're involved, what does it mean to the proceedings in general if they step forward and endorse the deal?
What does it mean to the prospects, the overall prospects of getting promised land?
Yeah.
Well, that's an intangible, Jay. Does it mean a lot? Does it mean a little? Does it mean somewhere in between? I think this PUC chair has given every rhetorical indication that he's not going to be swayed by the background buzz and noise and hoopla and big dogs and little dogs barking. So, behind closed doors, if and when the three commissioners actually will be making a decision at some point in 2016, how much the noise will influence their decision, I just don't know. It'd be interesting to ask the three of them that question.
Well, he keeps distinguishing himself, I mean, for example, your position, your desire to insinuate the issue of HEI-NEE into the proceedings. He didn't say no. He didn't say you can't make that point here. You can't come and argue that. He said, I'll have all comers. You want to talk about it? We can, right? Isn't that what he said? That's very creative. I mean, it's very open, don't you think?
Yes, I think they've bent over backwards to get more input rather than less. A record number of interveners, as far as I know, on any docket in the history of the state since 1959. So I think the dialogue has been broad. It's been expansive. I just looked at the PUC website moments ago. There were a total of 1,218 documents so far as part of the record, 1218. Probably coming to somewhere in the, 50 to 60,000 pages worth of total poundage. And, I don't envy those three individuals and their staff trying to, throw it all in the hopper, so to speak, and push the blend button at high speed and then come up with some type of elixir at the end that will be definitively up or down, yea or nay. I mean, my hit was a month ago, my hit was 6 months ago, that I think the best that the applicants can hope for is at least two of the three commissioners voting to approve the deal with very substantial conditions and stipulations. I find it inconceivable that they would sign off on it as is. So if it does come to a majority vote, and the majority vote is in their favor, the terms of the deal, the stipulations, the conditions are either going to be acceptable or they're going to not be acceptable. But I would bet the mortgage on my house that they're going to be substantial terms and conditions to if they do end up approving it.
Well, that's good regulatory practice, isn't it? I remember when was it Comcast wanted to buy Oceanic Time Warner, and the FCC had to approve that. And the issue, although at the end the FCC pulled it, or rather Time Warner pulled it, probably there was a deal between Wheeler, who's the chair of the FCC, and Time Warner, but they pulled it. But if they had not pulled it, it would have been a question not necessarily of acceptance or rejection, but what are the conditions to give everybody comfort. And I think that's good regulatory practice on the national level and on the state level. If it's got a reasonable, chance of doing what it's supposed to do, then the regulators have to get involved. They can't be necessarily bound by the agreement of merger or acquisition. And I agree with you. That'll probably happen here. I would be surprised if that didn't happen here. Although I want to be clear about one thing: I'm not mortgaging my house. You can mortgage your house, but I'm not mortgaging my house. It's too important. Anyway, you know what else he did, Randy? He said we could have daily transcripts. And that is really interesting. In a very hot trial, for example, in court, and remember, you have to remember that Randy is not only the PUC chair, not only a former legislator with experience of years and years, not only he ran for governor back a couple of years ago, and beyond that, he was a practicing lawyer. So he knows about trials, and he knows about how to treat objections and motions in limine to exclude things, and he knows, how to handle things like transcripts. So this was a really good idea. This was one of his best, I think, in terms of dealing with the procedure of this particular hearing. He's not going to make people pay, $9,000 for a copy of the transcript. He's going to let it go online, force it to go online, let everybody look at it. And that's good in the sense of transparency. It opens things up, commendable that way. That's the way the regulators should work. But B, this is really interesting, is that everybody will have a whack at everything that is said. So the newspapers, for example, can handle it in great detail about exactly who said what, because they'll have the transcript probably within a day, each day of the hearing. And that is going to give real legs to whoever said what under oath in these proceedings. I wouldn't say it makes it more like a circus, but it does make it more serious. What do you think?
I agree. And if I remember, there was the pre-hearing order that came out just last week of 20 or 30 pages, and it's quite detailed. And if I'm not mistaken, the commission will have an unlimited amount of time to question the witnesses. The CA, I believe, will have an unlimited amount of time to question witnesses. The interveners only have 15 minutes a pop, I believe, to do one round, and then they'll go through all the interveners, and then if there are still interveners that want to go further than 15 minutes, and there will be a second round of 10 minutes of questioning, and I believe that can go on, assuming there's not repetitive questioning, until all the interveners have said, okay, we're ready to move on.
Wow, this is, Marco they always say that it's all about time. It's all about time down there, total of 25 minutes per for 25 interveners, my goodness, plus the PUC. It sounds like weeks, months even. But, for us, it's about time too. And it's about time, for us to take a time out, to take a break, Marco. We're going to do that now because it's all about time.
Aloha, this is Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and I want to thank you for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. We are delighted to be partners with ThinkTech because it gives us the opportunity to bring to you a show every week on Monday at 2:00 p.m. called Ehana Kako. Ehana Kako means let's work together because we believe that Hawaii will be a better place when everybody works together. And in what way? Well, at the Grassroots Institute, we research 3 basic areas and we invite guests to come on board from across the country, the state, and the nation to talk about a better economy, a better government, a better society. Now, aren't those things we all want? Indeed. If you'd like to have the latest research in terms of public policy, as well as ways in which we can build a better government, economy, and society, then tune in every Monday on ThinkTech Hawaii at 2:00 p.m. for our fascinating guests on Ehana Kako. Let's work together. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, and I'll see you then. Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We said we'd be back, and we are back. And we're going to move on to our next item on the agenda, which is the rejection of the PSIP plans. So first, what is a PSIP? And second, what happened? Again, what happened?
Well, the PSIP, or PSIP for short, is the Power Supply Improvement Plan, and it is came about through the phasing out or demise of what was then known as the IRP, or the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, and essentially it was the HECO companies that have been tasked over the years to come up with a forward-looking plan and strategy as to how to provide better value to its ratepayers, how to integrate more renewables in a cost-effective fashion. And energy efficiency as well used to be part of that until essentially it was stripped away from the HECO companies legislatively a number of years ago. So the IRP, when it came to an end, essentially it was rejected by the commission, I'm going to say 2 to 3 years ago, when our friend Mina was chair of the commission. And essentially the HECO companies were told to go back, if not to square one, at least close to square one, and redo it with the new tag being the Power Supply Improvement Plan for each of the 3 HECO companies, HECO on Oahu, MECO for Maui County, and HELCO for the Big Island. So they came out with their first PSIP proposal last year, 2014, and that was studied by the commission, and it was rejected as being inadequate in a number of ways, rejected by the commission led again by Mina Morita, and then just recently the second iteration of the PSIP was rejected yet again by the Randy Awase led commission. So essentially it's the commission telling the HECO companies this ain't good enough, you have to do better, and that's what my HECO friends have been working very, very hard these past days since this rejection landed in their plate.
I know, they tried so hard. They worked hard on the first one. It took a long time. They were very transparent. They had an open group committee of like 60 people with input on that one. And then they got rejected anyway. I'm not sure what's missing here. It sounds like the PUC and HECO are not on the same page in terms of how you make a plan. And this is serious because everybody knows we got to have a plan. So in the absence of a plan, what happens? There's a vacuum. Marco, it's a vacuum.
I think it's the muddle. It's the muddle plan, Jay, and it's continue more or less status quo and try to do continue down the incrementalist path to doing things in a better fashion. And I very much support what the current president of HECO, Alan Oshima, has been trying to do since he rose to that position last fall. But it's I'm not a scholar of how public utilities commissions across the U.S. mainland, how they play nicely or not so nicely with their electric utilities. So I can't claim to have a very broad database by any means in terms of being able to compare. But it seems to me, again, with a limited sample size, it seems to me that this Hawaii Public Utilities Commission is taking an extremely activist role in determining the strategy and the tactics of the major utility companies here. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad, but it's perhaps above the norm or beyond the norm in terms of PUCs on the mainland regulating and being very specifically involved in the policies and strategies of utility companies.
Well,
Again, I don't
Marco,
know.
it seems to me that this is like, again, going back to Randy's, prior experience as a practicing lawyer, is one of those negotiations where the other guy comes out and says, I'll give you $10, and then you say, well, I reject that, but keep coming. And the guy says, well, I'll give you $20, and then you say, well, that's good, but it's not good enough, so keep coming. And every practicing lawyer has been involved in a strange negotiation like that, where you don't ever tell him what you want. You just tell him that what he's offered is not enough. That's what it sounds like. If there were more guidance, perhaps there would be a result here. But I have the sense that this is like one of those negotiations. Thanks for your, hundreds of pages of planning, not good enough, do it again. And so we never actually get home on it. And, you say that it's a proactive, activist PUC, but it seems to me that if it was really activist, it would write the plan. But politically that would be dangerous, because if there was something wrong in the plan, some kind of technical problem in the plan, then the regulators would be blamed for that, and maybe the government would be responsible for it legally.
Along those lines, Jay, I think it perhaps is appropriate to note some of the interesting news of last week. Speaking of the intersection between government and regulated utilities, as you had the mayor on your island, the Honorable Mr. Caldwell, who came out in no uncertain terms against the possibility, if I understood him correctly, against the possibility of turning HECO into a municipal or a utility or a muni. So it really kind of begs the interesting philosophical question: to what extent you should have a government entity being involved in running utility companies. And, the PUC is kind of quasi-governmental, right? But not really governmental. So, there's such this confluence of players, energy players here in the state, in this little state of ours in the middle of the Pacific, where we got so much at stake, and there's so many folks like little yapper dogs yipping and yapping at the heels that it's incredibly challenging, I think, to try to move in the direction where we all want to move. And just to be clear, where do we want to go? We want to go to a place where electric rates are cheaper, if at all possible, right? And we want to be able to have more renewable energy and reduce our dependence on imported fossil fuels coming from long, long ways away.
Yeah, but not necessarily in that order. The first order of business is clean, and the second order of business is as cheap as possible. My old thing is that we started out looking at clean in 2008, at least officially. And before 2010, we'd gotten off that track, essentially. That people out there, our good citizens, had decided that clean was not as important as cheap. And so everybody started swinging around their efforts to cheap. But everybody knows that you can't build new infrastructure on vapor. You have to spend money building new infrastructure. And, even if it's going down the road years ahead, going forward, it could be cheap. It's not cheap when you have to pay the price of the new infrastructure. I don't know why, the public doesn't understand that. I don't know why government agencies or regulators don't understand that. The first order of business is what we decided to do officially in 2008, and that is build it already. And we haven't actually done that yet. We've been
Well, you
fragmented.
can look from the perspective of the end of net energy metering on October 13th. That to me was a clear decision on the part of this commission that was been still being barked at loudly by a number of solar organizations. That it was a decision to go in favor of cheaper rather than more green at all costs. And what I mean by that is that net energy metering was fantastically successful for 70,000+ people, including I have one on my home, and I've been in the business obviously for 15 years here doing that. But is it the most cost-effective, the most equitable way to bring about more renewables? And I think if you look at the language that the chair used, I mean, he makes it very clear that it was a great program, and it's time for it to come to an end, which it did do last month, and we have to move forward more aggressively towards cost-effective renewables and not necessarily renewables at all costs.
Well, the thing moves on. It lurches from side to side. Leadership at the gubernatorial level is not strong. And we like an amoeba. We move in this direction, and then we move in that direction, and we don't have a plan, and people are not clear on exactly what's more important. And so, I don't know if we're going to reach our goals. The more I look at it, the more I think that it's like, the old saw about you forget. Once you decide, you forget and you move on, and the news cycle takes you for a little while, and then you lurch in another direction. And I think that's what we're in now. And I don't think this PUC thing, this long and arduous hearing over approval is really constructive. I think, at the end of the day, you have to trust the utility. You have to regulate the utility in a more moderate way and not push them around and make demands on them. And you have to build it with everybody working together instead of fighting. And I think we're involved in a big fight already. I don't think that's necessary. But I just had to say that. I hope you don't mind.
Do you have some magic sprinkle dust that you can perhaps sell in great quantities to be able to manifest that, Jay?
Not yet. But let's move on to our next issue. Let's have a commercial, and then we'll move on. So watch this. Bang.
Hello, everybody. I'm IC Davidson. Thanks for tuning in to ThinkTech Hawaii. One of the things that we do here, or the thing that we do here, is promote civic engagement in Hawaii. What does that mean? We want to talk about things that people want to hear about, and we want you to engage us and be part of that conversation. One of the ways that you can do that is by joining in during our live show via Twitter. How do you do that? Well, you get on the interwebs and get Twitter, get an account, and mention us if you have a question. What you'll do is you tune into our show live, tweet us questions, and our hosts and guests will address them accordingly. It's really easy, it's really fun, and I think that your participation in what we're doing here will help us continue the dialogue on very important issues that we're trying to cover. Sustainability, clean energy, you name it, we're on top of it. We want you to be part of what we're doing, because together we'll be able to make things change. Thank you for watching ThinkTech Hawaii, thinktechhawaii.com, weekdays 12 to 5 p.m. That was weird.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Marco Mangelsdorf. We join him by Skype audio.
Solar Skype.
Solar Skype. I like to power everything we do by solar. And he joins us by Skype audio from Hilo, Hawaii. So as we do every 2 weeks, we talk about energy and the state of clean, and we call this the Triple M. And when Mina Marita is around, she's not around, but when we do it, we call it Mina, Marco, and me. Since she's not here, we call it me, myself, and Marco, Triple M, okay? And we're going to talk about clean, and we're going to talk about what I think is very important, time of use rates. You know, one of the most interesting things that we never did in the state was set up the highways so that if you wanted to take the speed lane, then you would pay more. And it was dynamic. In other words, it depended on how many cars are in the speed lane. So if a lot of cars got in the speed lane, you know, then the price would be, you know, I guess more. And if not so many cars, the price would be less. And the idea was to encourage people to make decisions based on the price. And it's the whole thing about incentives. And I think where we miss out is incentives can be dynamic by the millisecond. Incentives can change the way people conduct themselves all day long, and especially because we have computer algorithms that will change the price immediately. This is happening in other places in the world, but I can't actually think of a place that's happening in Hawaii. Now, you could do this. We should have done this with clean energy, with energy in general a long time ago, in order to change the way people use energy. And finally now, it sounds like we're going to have time of use rates. I don't know if they're going to be dynamic according to an algorithm, but at least they'll change in order to incentivize, you know, a change in habits. What's happening, Marco?
Well, on the 12th of November, 11 days ago, Hawaiian Electric, as they were commanded to do, required to do by the PUC, provided a 178-page document to the PUC where they proposed TOU, time of use rates that would be available, ostensibly available to all residential customers. And they proposed a tariff amounts for 3 separate times of the day with what they called midday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. being the lowest price, the on-peak time from 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. being the highest price, which is a multiple of approximately 3x of the midday rate, and then an off-peak between 12 a.m. midnight to 9 a.m., which is a little bit more than at the midday. So why are they doing this? They're doing this to try to encourage people to load shift, to shift the consumption of electricity to cheaper parts of the day. In other words, when there's less demand on the system, there's more solar power available, and trying to encourage people to push power consumption away from peak, which is typically between 5 to 9 p.m. when people get home, power work, power school, and use more power during the midday period. So this is going to be available once it's approved by the PUC. It would be available conceivably to each and every homeowner. There is a real risk, though, in a homeowner doing this without dramatically changing their typical usage pattern, because, for example, here on this island, the midday time of use rate, if you were to sign up for that, is call it 16 cents a kilowatt hour, 16 cents, a little bit under actually, 15.71 cents. For the on-peak time from 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., that jumps up to 46.4 cents, 46.4 cents. So unless you become the energy tyrant with yourself and your family in terms of, don't, you can't turn the toaster on, we have to wait, you can't do that, you can't do laundry at 7 p.m. No, you have to wait until midday, you have to wait till tomorrow. You run the risk of having your electric bill go up, and that, of course, causes people to be very unhappy when they think they're trying to save money. So my hit is that there are going to be very few homeowners, at least initially, who are going to take the plunge. And of those people who do take the plunge, it wouldn't surprise me if not a fair amount of them would actually go back after 2 or 3 months, 4 months, and say, oh, this didn't work for me. So they will have the opportunity to do that. It's not you can only do it once in your lifetime. So sorry, no can change again, or change back to the regular rate. So there's going to be some trial and error, some experimentation, but I think at least in the short term, it's not going to make a heck of a lot of difference. Now, from my business perspective of being in the solar business, if you can supply power, if you can store power during the day and in batteries from your solar array and provide it to loads during the on-peak period of 4 to 12, then that has the potential of creating savings for the customer. for the homeowner. That said, I mean, the cost of batteries and putting together a design system to be able to pull all that off in a reliable, practical, cost-effective way, that's going to take some time. It's going to take trial and error. It's going to take some finagling and experimenting. And from the business perspective of one who's been toiling in the solar industry for years, you have to be able to accurately represent and describe the value proposition to the homeowner and not get over expectations about what it's going to do in terms of energy savings. So I really see it kind of being a rather perilous time in the weeks and months to come as folks in my business try to get a clear understanding of it to be able to accurately represent the benefits and what it's not going to do.
I think it's a great idea conceptually. Kudos to Hawaiian Electric for having come up with it and dividing it up the way it has. But I keep thinking that the only way it's going to work long term, I take your point, I think the only way it's going to work long term is if you make, you make the disparity in time and use great enough to have a real impression on people, where it really counts to them. And I think that means using a computer, using an algorithm, having it be completely dynamic. If not enough people are, doing their laundry at night, then you make the rates lower yet at night, and you make them higher yet in the peak hours, and so forth. And you keep on, pushing that with a computer algorithm until it gets to a point where people really do hear the value of the different, time of rate. So I think it's a step in the water, but we have a way to go before we actually start using the technology. The other thing is that, and I don't know how you deal with this, but there are some people who couldn't give a rip, that we have an income disparity. And, it's hard to reach them. I mean, there are people right now that pay thousands of dollars per month for the, power in their homes on the existing not time of use rates. And it doesn't bother them a bit, because it's small change. And I don't know how they would be affected by this kind of incentive, maybe never. So you have a certain percentage of people who will be affected, but a lot of people will not be affected at all. And therefore, that's kind of a hole in the boat, where you don't know exactly how to reach them and incentivize them in the same way. Too bad, I think.
Well, and I really look forward to getting the Triple M back with us, getting Mina back online, because she has been writing quite a bit and speaking about how data analytics are really becoming so critically important. And she wrote a very thoughtful letter to the editor in response to the Hawaii Business Magazine article of a couple of months ago on looking at co-ops and utility ownership models here in the state. And in this month's issue, she wrote a very thoughtful letter where she essentially makes the case that utility ownership, or the utility ownership model, is less important than whatever the model is, what they're doing, how they're operating their utility in this new day and age, which is so different than the utilities have operated for decades and decades. So I think your point is well taken in terms of dynamic responsiveness to trying to incentivize, and who else is doing this on the mainland to the extent that we are. I mean, I think that's one of the, as they've stated, one of the big attractions for NextEra is that we're really on the cutting edge here in a number of ways, and they're saying what they can bring to us and the resources they could bring to us, but I think they're also very interested in getting real world experience about things, challenges that they will have to deal with on the U.S. mainland.
Yeah, if everything was working right, they could learn a lot from us, because we're a small state, where population is not that great, our use is not that great, and we are as we are in so many other areas, we're a great laboratory, and we could put some of these really advanced ideas to use, such as the dynamic program I was describing using computer algorithms, and other things where we could, be totally transparent, totally equitable, make it work for everybody, and that's what we're all about. We have to get back to that. We have to stop focusing on disparity and pushing disparity. We have to be on the same page. Mahayana, the greater good. Well, let me ask you, Marco, I always say that, you know that. What about the solar industry right now? We're in transition. It's not trouble-free. There's a lot of issues, and people and companies are suffering. What's the status? You know, you follow this closely. What's the status of the solar industry, including the big players from the mainland?
Well, let me go from micro to more macro. We are in the post-NEM world now as of about a month ago, and according to the permit data for October at least, it was the 9 months in a row of permit for Oahu. More PV permits this year for October than compared to October 2014. That said, with the end of NEM, there is a dip that's taking place now in terms of new sales. We don't know how long it's going to be or how deep the dip is going to be, and we're not going to know until we start coming out of it. So I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned. I am concerned, and I think I speak for a lot of my colleagues because the value proposition for post-NEM under the customer grid supply or customer self-supply is just not as good as it was under NEM. So, we have to adjust, and just don't know how long that dip's going to be. Going on the macro, the very interesting dynamics or dramas playing out on the national and global scene are companies like SunEdison that have become one of the world's leaders in terms of finance systems, both on the utility scale and Mondo mega utility scale, and they've been very aggressive in their acquisitions over the past year or two. They have Vivint Solar that they will be in the process of purchasing from the Blackstone Group, and they have been losing a tremendous amount of money. Their debt is somewhere in the $11 billion range. Their stock has lost more than 90% of its value from just the past 5 or 6 months, and it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. There's some in the punditocracy, the financial analysts who believe that Chapter 11 bankruptcy is a strong possibility. There's others who poo-poo that and say no, they have a strong pipeline and they're poised for growth. And they just have to get their house in order and so forth and so on. This is all, again, beyond my ability to prognosticate.
Let me ask you this, Marco, and this would be within your ability. If you were a young fellow, just graduated from Holmes Hall there at University of Hawaii School of Engineering in, say, electrical engineering, and you were scanning on entrepreneurial possibilities in the state, would you consider going into the PV business right now? Or would you say instead, no way, Jay Jose? Which way?
Oh, that's a juicy question, Jay. That's a really juicy question. I think it's going to depend on what part of the country that newly minted college graduate would be wanting to dive into.
I'm talking about right here at home.
Right here in this state?
Yeah. But I heard a kind of a deep breathing where you were breathing out, and I said to myself, what a perfect time to take a break from this show. What a perfect time to say, we'll be back for further discussion of this and other important questions, especially in the lap of the PUC proceedings taking place, a week from now. So Marco, thank you so much for joining me and us again here in myself, and Marco, otherwise known as Mina, Marco, and me. And we'll set up a time in the week, 2 weeks from now, to further to continue this discussion and to find out what's going on in energy. Let's call it State of Clean. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, sir. Till the next time.
Aloha.